Welcome to Old Man Sports Talk. I'm your host, Old Man Nate, and today we have a very special guest from Horn Takes Podcast. We have Sean. Welcome to the show, Sean.
Hey, what's up, Nate?
Glad to have you on, man. This is such an honor to have you as a Longhorn fan, and I've seen your show, several of them. You do an outstanding job, and I'm glad to have you on.
Well,
Today's
thanks for having
topic.
me.
Oh, you're welcome. And today's topic, we're going to talk about Oklahoma and Texas move to the SEC starting in 2024. I know a lot of Sooners and a lot of Texas fans, Longhorn fans, have big opinions on it, and myself and Sean's going to give our opinions on it tonight. So, Sean, what do you think? Or first of all, I'm just afraid I'd ask you. When we talk about sports, almost every sport, or I mean, almost when you just say the teams, it's automatically assumed it's football. Okay, so we'll just start with football. Do you think right now, if OU and Texas was to go to the SEC starting today, are they ready for SEC football?
Uh, I, that's a kind of a crazy question because what really is SEC football. I know obviously the SEC. Everybody knows that follows college football. The SEC puts a lot of guys in the league. Lots of really outstanding players come out of the SEC. Obviously they've won multiple national championships. They've basically been running college football since I don't know, like 2006, 2007 time frame. They've been doing a really good job of kicking the crap body. But I think when I look at the SEC, I think about like offensive linemen, very powerful offensive lines, very athletic and powerful defensive lines. And I think if you watch the SEC play football, especially the really good teams in the SEC, that's where they're really different than most of the rest of the teams in the. I think skill position wise, there's teams in the Big Ten, there's teams in the Big 12, there's teams out on the West Coast in the Pac, and even over in the ACC that have really good skill position players. But the reason the SEC teams, especially those really good ones, can go beat the hell out of them all the time is because they dominate the trenches. So from a Texas perspective, I would say they're getting there. I think if they jump ship next year for whatever reason, like we could skip the whole 2023 season in the Big 12 and we had to go to the SEC. I think they have some of the players of the roster that you need to have. They've got some good defensive line recruits. They've got some good offensive line recruits, but a lot of them are really young and they're underdeveloped. The other thing about the SEC, and you look at like Georgia's recruiting and Alabama's recruiting, it's not just one class at a time. It's multiple layers of these classes. So they bring these kids in. A lot of them don't play right off, and if you can keep them, you just develop talent in behind talent in behind talent. And so I think when you look at Texas's roster and you look at Oklahoma's roster, they're a little bit light type of developed depth. Frontline guys, yeah, they could probably go in there and hang for a couple quarters with most SEC teams. You're looking at Georgia and Alabama and stuff like that. They could probably beat the middle of the pack SEC teams and the not so great SEC teams, but they're not really ready to go, in my opinion, either team to compete for SEC championship right now. I think Texas might be maybe just a tick ahead of Oklahoma, although Oklahoma recruiting wise, ever since Venables was named the head coach, has done really well, and they've already got a lot of really good guys committed, at least in this 2024 class.
And I agree with everything you said. I think one thing though that most people, or at least your SEC fans, think that every team in the SEC is good, right?
Yeah.
And in reality, there's only about two or three teams that are good, really, really good every year, right? So um, I guess it depends on what you consider. Are they ready for the SEC? Could they? I've said this before on my show. Could Oklahoma and Texas go into SEC today and win games? Yeah, They could win a lot of games. They could probably win 8 or 9. But here's the key, and this is going to be the key once once they get this all together and everything. It's going to be if they do pods, and it's going to be, or if they do divisions. I think they'll go to the pod way the talks and it makes more sense. But because you got to put the pods even. All right. You can't. I mean, you cannot have Oklahoma, Texas, Texas A&M, and LSU in the same pod. If that happens, then really probably none of those teams are going to get a chance to play for an SEC championship because they're going to just cancel each other out year in and year out. And then you got on the other side, the other teams that are really good are Georgia and Alabama right now. Every once in a while, you'll have another team show up, like Tennessee was a surprise team last year. Florida's been okay at times, right? Auburn's had a good year or two. But other than that, there's nobody that is consistently good besides Georgia and Alabama. Even LSU is not consistently good. They had one good year. 2 years later, they're firing their coach and barely winning games. So I think it's important about where the pods are at. I personally would like to see OU, Texas A&M, and probably Missouri as a pod, but Arkansas would take Arkansas too. I like the Missouri because then you got 4 old Big 12 teams going at it again. But I don't know. I really don't know what they're going to do. But it's got to be even. And even really, if you put Alabama and Georgia on the other side in separate pods, and you're probably not. I mean, we're still probably going to have the hardest pod, but I think it'll be more level, more chance to have somebody go to SEC championship game and compete for that. Either way, though, now at the same time we're expanding the playoffs, right? So we're going to get a good chance to at least compete for a national championship every year, even if we're in a tough pod. Because I think they'll take that in consideration. So yeah, are you looking forward to the SEC move, or are you kind of like, man, I wish I would have stayed in the Big 12?
Yeah, I'm forward to it. I'm as well as being just a huge diehard Texas Longhorn fan. I just love like good college football. I'm not an NFL guy at all. I barely watch it at all. My wife's a Cowboys fan, so when the Cowboys play, I'm supporting her Cowboys.
Yeah.
But I don't live or die by the Cowboys like I do Texas Longhorns. But I really like cool matchups, and I think with Oklahoma and Texas moving into the SEC, there's just going to be an opportunity for just a lot of really, really neat like road trips, neat matchups. There's going to be teams coming to Austin and teams going to Norman that have never gone to Austin and have never gone to Norman. It's been years and years and years since those teams have met, and now you're looking at it, and they're going to meet, on a semi-regular schedule. You're kind of talking about the schedule and how the SEC is going to do that. I don't really know either. I don't think they've announced it. I know they've announced a lot of the scheduling for the Olympic sports like baseball, gymnastics, diving, swimming, all that good stuff. But I think football is kind of still up in the air. They're going to have to figure it out pretty quick because teams got to, do the logistical thing and make all that work. But what I thought was really interesting was a guy named Kyle Umlang. He's a Texas guy. I don't know exactly what he is, how he's affiliated with Texas, but he's got a lot of followers on social media, and he posted this little graphic. He may have stole it. I have no idea, but it actually showed, and I did some stuff on one of my podcasts about it. It actually showed 3 traditional rivals that you get lumped in with, and then you play, one of 2 in these specific boxes. And if you looked at Texas's, it was Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Texas A&M were their traditional rivals that they would play every single year. And then there was, I think, 8 other games or maybe 9 other games. I don't remember how many other games, 7 other boxes or whatever that had multiple teams inside of those boxes. And you would play, like, for example, Texas's was Georgia and Alabama was their very first box. So every other year they're playing Georgia, they're playing Alabama. And there was, several like that. The other crazy thing about all of this for the SEC scheduling wise and just championship wise, you're looking at 16 schools now. The tiebreak rules are just going to have to be unbelievably crazy. But you're right. Competing for an SEC championship is going to be very, very hard, even for the blue bloods in the SEC going forward. And the key in football is to get into that college football playoff when it expands in 2024. For a long time, even in the SEC, winning your conference hasn't been that big of a deal. We've seen it multiple times where they've had teams that weren't in their conference championship game end up in the college football playoff. So I think what we'll start to see in maybe 20 or 30 years, fans of college football won't really hold near and dear to those conference championships the way they do today. Kind of like how it is in basketball. Regular season title's great, and then there's a tournament in basketball, and if you win it, great. If you don't, all right, who cares? We're going on to the NCAA tournament anyway. It just doesn't have the same weight as maybe it used to.
You're probably right about that. Let me take a second here to throw some advertisements. If you like coffee, go to Old Man Coffee Shop and get you some coffee. You can also get you a tumbler. These are made by A&K Engravers, so go ahead and get you some of those. And we got some T-shirts, so go in there and check it out. Also, if you haven't at this time, please like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you have all the notifications. And also on this show, I'm going to have a link to Horn Takes podcast on YouTube and his TikTok channel also, so you can follow Sean on both of those. So moving on, let's move on to basketball. Okay, do you think OU and Texas are ready for the SEC in basketball? Personally, I mean, some people argue this, but I think they're probably going to be a little bit easier basketball-wise going to the SEC. I know Alabama was really good this year. Kentucky's had some really good years, but they've been kind of down the last 4 or 5 years. Florida at one time had some really good years, but they haven't been the same in a long time. I don't know. Maybe I'm missing a team or two that's pretty good, but unlike the Big 12, where Kansas is good every year, Baylor's won a championship. Texas Tech played for a national championship. Texas, your Longhorns let me down. They busted my bracket yesterday, man. But I had them pick to win it all, and they had the team to do it. I didn't get to watch the game, so I don't know what happened. But yeah, the really really good basketball. I mean, Oklahoma was last in the Big 12, and they beat Alabama this year. They played Texas twice to 3-point games, right? They played Kansas at their place they lost by 5, but had them down 10 with 5 minutes to go and choked it off. So every team in the Big 12 is good, really good. SEC, that's not the case. I mean, yeah, there's more teams, but there's not 10 really good teams in the SEC. Auburn's another good team that's really good, but there's probably about 4 or 5 really good teams, in my opinion, in the SEC. After that, it's just average basketball. So I think OU and Texas will have a lot easier schedule in basketball-wise. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll if you guys check out the podcast tomorrow, I'll be talking about that Texas game against Miami, so you'll know exactly what happened if you check out the podcast. But as far as SEC scheduling, I think that you're right. I think the Big 12 has been generally accepted as the deepest basketball conference for a few years now in the NCAA. As you mentioned, a lot of teams have gone really deep in the tournament from the Big 12. So I think, at the worst, moving over to the SEC in basketball is like a lateral move, but it's probably more likely that the schedule will be a tiny bit easier on Texas and moving into the SEC. I think what's interesting about the SEC is there's a lot of talent in the SEC, even in basketball and even on some of those teams that aren't as good. So you never know what's going to happen. I would, to me, I think the SEC is probably the second best conference, just because so many of the teams are so dangerous. It doesn't always show through in their record, but they're really talented. You get them in a tournament type scenario where, and the NCAA tournament, you look at teams throughout the year and you go, these teams should go win, and they do the whole seeding thing. This has been the absolute craziest year NCAA tournament. Not a single one or two is going to the Final Four, which I don't think that's ever happened before, actually.
Or three, or three seed. There's not three
right.
seed.
So that's definitely not happened. It's all about getting hot at the right times, kind of like the baseball postseason in college. There's teams all year long that, well, what was it a couple years ago? Arkansas was the number one team in the country. They beat the brakes off of everybody in a really tough baseball conference, and they didn't even make it out of their own regional. I think they lost their regional. They either lost in the regional or lost in the super regional. So the number one seed in the tournament was out almost immediately. Didn't even make it to Omaha. And then you got, last year, Ole Miss is a team that they were good, obviously, but nobody was talking about Ole Miss to go win a national championship in baseball. They went and won a national championship in baseball. So with these tournaments, you just never really know. But I think, basketball wise, I think Oklahoma and Texas will be fine in the SEC. They'll definitely raise the dangerousness of the SEC in terms of a basketball conference.
Definitely. So at this time, I'm going to ask the viewers, if you're watching this, what are your thoughts on OU and Texas moving to the SEC? Do you think that they will be able to compete in all sports? But, mostly we talk about football, but do you think they'll be able to compete, or do you think it's a dumb move and they should just stay where they're at in the Big 12? So you mentioned baseball. Let's go and move on to men's baseball. And I definitely think the OU, OU in Texas, or Texas primarily, has been a dominant force in the Big 12 when it comes to baseball. There's been some other good teams at times. Oklahoma State, last couple of years, been pretty good. Oklahoma had a run last year, and they have won a World Series a couple of times, but they're not consistent. They're not consistently at the top. It's, they'll have a really good year and then 5 or 6 really bad years. So Texas, I think, will be able to compete, even though the SEC is really good, probably the best conference in baseball, and has been for a while. I think Texas will be able to compete right away. OU, on the other hand, they're going to have to get them transfer portals, get in, dig deep in that, and use the NIL, I think, to be able to compete. Otherwise, after this year, their chances of probably even making the postseason it's going to be really, really tough for them. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I definitely think the SEC is the best conference in baseball, without a doubt, hands down. It's not even close. Used to kind of be the Big 12. You had Oklahoma State, Baylor. Baylor used to be pretty good in baseball back in the early to mid 2000s. Texas Tech has been kind of one of those teams for a long time there's been some years where Tech's been the number one team in the country starting out the season, and they've Tech's kind of been disappointing from a postseason perspective, but always had pretty good teams, and especially ever since Tadlock got there, ball a ton. So I think the SEC for Texas is still going to be tough, but I think Texas is in a much better position moving into the SEC from a baseball perspective than Oklahoma is. Like you said, Oklahoma had that kind of crazy wild last year where they didn't honestly do a whole lot during the regular season, and they got in the tournament, the Big 12 tournament, and got hot, won that thing, and then they just kept going and carried that right on into to a final berth in the College World Series. So the interesting thing and I'm going to do a show about this next week as well, and it's going to be more geared towards football. But the interesting thing about all of this move to the SEC is I wonder what Texas and Oklahoma see from a recruiting jump by just now actually being in the SEC. All these other schools could always say, like Texas A&M, for example, when they jump to the SEC, they could always Texas recruits yeah, man, we get to play in the SEC and
Mm-hmm.
Texas doesn't and Oklahoma doesn't. And that was kind of a thing they had in their back pocket. They could tell, they could tell all these players, you're going to get to go play in Alabama. You're going to go play in Auburn and Florida and Tennessee, Georgia, South Carolina and baseball. So they don't have that anymore. And now Texas and Oklahoma are moving into that conference. They're going to have the ability to tell that same story. And I wonder from you look at Texas and Oklahoma's athletic programs, and they have not been great lately. They've been good, and in their own specific areas, good. Not so much in football for Texas lately, but baseball, basketball, they've been good. What happens when they go in and they can start cherry picking guys that would normally never think about going to Texas, never think about going to Oklahoma? It's going to kind of dilute the talent, I think, across the SEC, and it'll take time. It's not going to be like a thing that happens immediately. And I think Oklahoma and Texas are going to need to go in and have some early success to really accelerate it. But there's an opportunity for a lot of these kids that staying in these SEC schools that now may say, man, I want to go check out Austin, Texas. I want to go be in Austin for 4 years. So obviously we don't know what'll happen, but I think there's a lot of opportunity for both of those schools to go in and do better than a lot of people think they can do actually.
Oh, I agree. Now, obviously, Oklahoma had a really bad year last year. First losing season, I believe, since 1998 or 98 or 99. Bob Stoops, I believe it was Bob
I
Stoops'
think
first
Stoops
year.
got hired in 99. So, and they had a record, I think, his first year.
Yeah, they lost to Ole Miss in the dang, was it it's in Liberty Bowl, I think it was. I don't remember, but it was a bowl. I remember losing to Ole Miss. What's his name? Deuce McAllister. Yeah, he ran all over us. So, um, but yeah. Oh, and Eli Manning was the quarterback. So, yeah, we lost to them. But uh, I, I do think you mentioned earlier recruiting for OU is Brent Venables done a good job, and he has done a good job. One thing I think people think into consideration that OU is down, and of course, crazy OU fans say, "Oh, we got to fire Brent Venables already after 1 year." Was he had to rebuild the roster? Lincoln Riley shredded our roster when he left, and I'm not even talking about just players he took with him because he only took about 4 or 5 with him, but players still left. Spencer Rattler and Stogner went to South Carolina. Hazelwood, our best receiver, went to Arkansas. So, and there's other players too, but those are your main. Those are all starters that I mentioned that left, along with Caleb Williams and the receiver Williams that went to USC, and a couple other defensive back that went over there too. So, yeah, he shredded our roster. Venables had to come in and get people off the transfer portal, and sometimes those players aren't the best players. They shouldn't even be playing Division I football. And it was proven when our backup quarterback, Bevell, who did transfer from Pittsburgh, couldn't even throw a pass against Texas Longhorns. You know, I will say today that if we had Gabriel, we still probably would have lost to Texas. Well, we wouldn't have lost 49-0. I know that. So we probably lost 35-24 or something like that. But when your backup quarterback can't even throw a forward pass, that says a lot. Matter of fact, he shouldn't have been on scholarship. You probably go in the stands like they do for kickers a few times and grab a quarterback that throw better than him. So it was embarrassing. Now we got the number one, well, depending on who you look at as far as recruiting wise. I know Archie Manning is considered number one high school recruit, and there's others that think that Jackson Arnold is better. It don't matter who better. They both still got to prove who's better on the field. In due time, that will happen against each other. It won't be this year unless somebody gets hurt from Texas. Ewers gets hurt from Texas, or Gabriel gets hurt from Oklahoma. Neither one of those guys will see the field this year. But in the future, there's going to be some great showdowns, and I think that Venables is getting the right pieces in the right place. Now, one other key thing though to be in the SEC, you can have 11 guys on defense, 11 guys on offense that are ready to go compete in the SEC. The difference is not the first 11; it's your second 11 and your third
Mhm.
11. That's what Alabama and Georgia has. They got 33 players that can line up on both sides of the ball and hit you in the mouth and knock you out. Whereas OU and Texas might have, right now, we might have, you know, eight or nine on each side of the ball, right? We don't have it, and we need to get more. And I think it's going to happen. Sarkeesian, his first year was pretty rough, like Venables was last year, but his second year he bounced back really good, and just a game shy from competing for the Big 12 championship. My goal this year, my dream this year, is for OU and Texas to slug it out in the Big 12 championship. I think if that happens, it shows a lot of people, it don't matter who wins the game, that both teams are ready to at least take that step. But if you can't get there in the Big 12 championship this year, even with the new additions, because those new additions, um, none of them should compete with OU or Texas ever. No, none of those four should ever step on the field and compete with OU and Texas. But I think I think that OU if OU and Texas go play each other for the Big 12 championship, we'll both be ready for the SEC to go and compete. Maybe not compete for the championship the first year, maybe, but we're going to keep growing like we have been, and probably 2 or 3 years we're competing for conference championships. That's my opinion. What you think?
Yeah, I think that first of all, I think that'd be a huge middle finger to the Big 12 if Texas and Oklahoma wound up in the Big 12 championship game next year. I think obviously I feel like Texas has a little head start on that,
Yeah,
but the downside of that is I almost look at this 2023 season for Steve Sarkeesian as kind of the put up or shut up year. He came in, he got a late start in recruiting. He didn't really get to sign a classes, and this is not anything new. Like most head coaches
yeah,
get hired in the offseason, they don't get a chance to recruit that first class that's them. But then the thing Steve Sarkeesian had to do, which kind of happened a little bit differently than the same thing that happened at Texas, was absolutely gut the roster. They
yeah,
just told a bunch of guys, you don't belong here. This isn't what we want to do. Go on. And then after that first season that was really, really rough, the same thing happened. So the roster that Steve Sarkeesian inherited was pretty talented. It wasn't talented in the right spots, and a lot of those guys he didn't want. And so they've moved on. And to me, and ever since then, he signed these two really, really good recruiting classes, top 5 recruiting classes. Now he's got to take those guys out on the and actually do something with them. So I feel like Venables still probably has some capital in the recruiting world that Steve Sarkeesian will no longer have unless he can go out and be successful. So for me in 2023, I think Texas absolutely has to play in the Big 12 championship game for Steve Sarkeesian to be able to continue the recruiting momentum he has. I think if Venables can't get Oklahoma in the game, but they have a pretty good improvement this season, I think he still has another year where he can go out and convince top recruits, hey, we're building something. Come play at Oklahoma and be a part of it. Whereas Steve Sarkeesian, you can only tell people this is the vision, this is what we're building towards for so long without actually attaining what you're building towards, right? So I think that's the sort of crux for Steve Sarkeesian this year. And I think he has the roster to do it. I think, TCU kind of came out of nowhere last year and was really, yeah. I, I made the comment on my podcast one time about TCU. I said they're really not even that good. They just keep finding ways to win games. And I knew they would win game or lose games down the stretch. I knew Kansas State was going to beat them in the Big 12 championship game. And obviously I knew Georgia was going to pound them. I don't think any of us could have predicted that kind of pounding. But TCU kind of caught the conference at the right time. The conference has been down. TCU had a very experienced team. And Max Duggan was like, I mean, give that guy credit. He drove that team. He basically took that team, put them on his shoulders, and led them to that national championship berth. You look at their semifinal game against Michigan. Michigan pissed that game away.
Mm-hmm.
TCU is not a better team than Michigan. They won the game, but it took 2 picks by Michigan. I mean, I don't think, and now TCU's losing a lot of guys, so they don't have all that veteran leadership like they had this year, and it's gonna make a difference for that team. I'm not saying they may still be good and they may still compete across the board in the Big 12, but they're not gonna have guys that go, I know how to win this football game. They won so many games last year just on experience, and they're not gonna have that this year. So yeah, I think you're right. I think if Texas and Oklahoma, either one can end up in that Big 12 championship game, I think it shows that they're ready to go kind of be a player in the SEC. And I'm not talking about going there and dominate the SEC. That's not going to happen. Even the two teams that are the best two teams in the SEC right now, they have their share of problems, right? They, outside of Georgia this year, there's always seems to be a loss for the best teams in the SEC, and they get in off anyway, and then they take care of business. So, but I think they'll be in the discussion. I see a lot of comments on TikTok and stuff like that about Texas and Oklahoma are going to be bottom of the barrel with Vanderbilt and Missouri, and I just think that's doesn't make any sense. It's backwards thinking. It's probably more or less just trolling, but that's okay.
Right. No, I agree. There is a lot of people out there that, think that if you're outside the SEC, you don't know anything about football. So, coming into their conference, it is going to be a wake up call, okay? Because you're going to get hit in the mouth every week when you're playing Missouri or South Carolina or Ole Miss or Mississippi State, right? Whereas, now I will say this: OU and Texas though are kind of used to that in a way, because they were the top dogs, at least name wise, in the Big 12, right? So every team that played those two guys was wanting to knock them out,
right?
Even when they had bad seasons, right? Like we had a bad season last year when Texas had their bad season. If they could talk about beating OU in Texas, then it made their day. It was like winning, championship for them. So OU is going to be used to getting hit in the mouth. Texas is going to be used to getting hit in the mouth, but it's going to be a different type of hitting, I think. So the last thing I want to talk about is: do you think the Big 12 will survive with OU and Texas leaving the conference?
I think that the new leadership in the Big 12 is infinitely better than what was the leadership in the Big 12 for a long time, and what probably led Oklahoma and Texas to, I don't know how all that stuff went down behind the scenes. I don't know, there's always been discussions. I don't know if they unilaterally reached out to the SEC. I don't know if they, if Oklahoma and Texas got together and said, "Hey, man, this shit's about to fall apart. Maybe we need to start looking at a new place to go." I don't know any of that stuff.
Right. But
the ship that was running the Big 12 was really, really stagnant, not very good. And now I think, they're making moves. I even saw there's possible more expansion talk with some of the leftover Pac-12 teams. So, and that wasn't too long ago, maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, some reports by Pete Thamel that a couple of those leftover Pac-12 teams, Pac-10, whatever they are, they're like almost shoe-ins to get an offer from the Big 12. Now, I don't know when that'll come, but I think they will find a way to continue to be a conference. Now, whether it's a big picture conference, I don't know the answer. I mean, you look at who's left. There's not very many blue bloods anymore, and there's zero. When you take Texas and Oklahoma out of that mix, there's not any blue bloods anymore. There's not a lot of history of success anymore in that conference. So it end up being it's going to be a Power 5 conference because we're running out of Power 5 conferences, but it's not going to play like a Power 5 conference. So I don't think you'll have some teams that from the Big 12 that get into the playoff. But will they be able to compete against Big 10 now that you got USC, LA headed that direction? Will they be able to compete against the schools from the SEC that get in there? Uh, on a micro level, yes, they will. Like some teams out of the Big 12 will beat some teams out of the SEC and Big 10 that make those playoffs, but it's not going to be a widespread deal. So they survive. I just don't think. I think it all just kind of depends on what your definition of survival means, and I don't. They're not going to be a major player ever again. I don't think.
Right. I think really maybe even to survive, I think that they will have to reach out to those Pac-12 teams like Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado, and Utah. They need to get those four teams to have any really respect around college football. All right. The conference itself will be considered like the Conference USA.
Right.
Right. Um, and yeah, they'll still have the label of Power Five, but they're not going to be a Power Five when it comes to the level of competition. ACC is barely a Power Five, and that's with Clemson and Florida State and Miami hanging them on by a thread. North Carolina has been okay, but they haven't. I guess Miami's been okay too, and Florida State was better last year than they had been in a long time. Clemson's national championships helped the ACC stay alive, um, but uh, I don't think Clemson. I think Clemson's probably going to go down after Brent Venables left. I don't think they're going to get back up to the level they was. I mean, I could be wrong, and we'll see what happens. But I don't think I think once OU and Texas leave, none of those teams that are bringing in they're not bringing them in to help make the conference stronger. They're bringing them in to try and help the conference survive, and they're not bringing anything. None of those teams. Yeah. Cincinnati went to college football playoff, but that's because they didn't really have a choice but to put them in there. They were undefeated, and they barely beat Tulsa that year in the conference championship game. So I just I really think that the Big 12 is going to fall apart unless they get the Pac-12 teams in. If those Pac-12 teams choose to go to other conferences, maybe the Big Ten, because the Big Ten is going to be a pretty solid conference. Just right underneath the SEC, they're going to stay solid. But if they don't get those Pac-12 teams, they better start looking to go to the ACC to have any type of respect when it comes to football. Otherwise, it's going to be looking like the Conference USA. So,
yeah, I think that's kind of what I was saying, and the interesting thing about the whole Pac-12 deal is, if they do pull some of those schools from the Pac-12, like what the hell happens to Oregon and
yeah.
Oregon State and Washington State? What do those teams do? Do they join up with like Fresno State and, some of those other Western athletic type teams and form a conference? Or I mean, Oregon's got a name. I mean, I would think like somebody would reach out to Oregon and try to get Oregon to come be a part of their conference, maybe the Big Ten. I don't know. But yeah, it's like ever since the announcement came out about Texas and Oklahoma moving to the SEC, all of these conference commissioners have been scrambling, trying to figure out how they, it's what they do next. It's kind of been like a domino effect, right? It hit the Big 12, obviously, and then you got the two schools out of the Pac-12 joining the Big 10. They're all the stable conferences are trying to add and get more power, and all the unstable conferences are running around cutting each other's throats, just trying to stay alive and have a job. So I don't know what this is all going to end up looking like. I kind of feel like in about 10 years you're going to have these two super leagues, and they may not be called what they're called today, but you're going to have all the traditional SEC teams and the traditional Big Ten teams and whatever teams come and join, I feel like there's these two leagues that just kind of lord over college football almost to the point where they become their own thing. Like the NCAA isn't the sanctioning body anymore, and it's almost like a semi-pro type deal, which I'm personally not a huge fan of. But I think that's the we're headed
Yep.
with college football. And then maybe further down the road, what we call mid-major conferences today are a completely separate deal. Uh, they still get a chance to play some of those bigger schools, but as far as postseason goes, it's a totally different animal. I really don't. It'll be interesting to see how that kind of turns out over the next 10, 15, 20 years.
Yep. I agree with you 100%. Was there anything that you'd like to discuss we haven't discussed?
No, I appreciate you having me on the show. I think I think a lot of Texas fans are really excited about I assume Oklahoma fans are as well. I think the college football world, especially, and probably the college baseball world, I think that Texas and Oklahoma are about to get into a buzzsaw that they can't get out of, and maybe it is slow for them for a while, but they're Texas and Oklahoma, and they're gonna be able to recruit. And sometimes all you need is just one little cool thing to happen, and the whole thing blossoms for you. Like if Texas could have beat Alabama last year, if they could have found a way to pull that out, I really think the trajectory, and although it was really good, it was a positive year for Texas compared to what they had been doing. I think it's totally different. I think that year ends up totally different. And then who knows what happens in recruiting. So they're right there. I know Texas is right there. Third and fifth recruiting class the last couple years. They're getting it in the right places, line, defensive line. And then they're adding, really highly rated skill guys. Not tons of them, but those really cream of the crop type guys at the skill position players. They're adding those types of guys. And so it'll be interesting to see for Texas what happens this year in 2023. I really like this could be a year where they kind of break out. And I'm not one of those guys that says, I'm not the Texas is back guy. I get tons of comments about Texas is back all the time. I don't say that stupid crap because to me, Texas is not back until they actually go out and do something. And then they may not even be back. Tennessee had a really good year this year. TCU had a really good year this year.
Right.
It's stacking those types of years on top of each other that makes you quote unquote back.
Right.
Not one single event or not one single season. So, but I think Steve Sarkisian's building. If he can be successful this year on the field, if he can win a Big 12 championship this year on the field, his recruiting is just going to continue to get better and better. It's already crazy good. But if he can start winning some games like that and putting some championships in the back pocket, and then, the SEC and have some early success, people are going to notice that, and recruits are going to notice that. And that's all Nick Saban did at Alabama. And that's all Kirby Smart did at Georgia, was start recruiting and build a couple classes, win some games, win some big games, and then it was like a snowball. And you got what you got now. You got Georgia and Alabama basically fighting it out for who's going to go win the national championship every year now.
Yep. I agree 100%. Well, looking forward to the season. Are you going to go to your spring game?
I won't actually go to the spring game this year. My son plays baseball, so we got baseball all the time in the spring. But I will go. We're season ticket holders, so we'll go down and check out at least a couple games probably in Austin. We'll definitely go to the Red River Shootout over in Dallas, and so we're looking forward to it. I don't know if I'll make the cutoff to get Alabama tickets. We'll have to see how that goes. I've got some hotels. I got multiple hotels booked for the Alabama trip.
Okay.
I think I really want to go see a game in Tuscaloosa.
Yeah.
That was an awesome experience last year down in Austin, and so I think going and seeing it from the opposite perspective,
Hmm.
being the less colored jerseys in the crowd, it will probably be pretty cool.
Yep, that would be pretty cool. Well, I hope you get a chance to go, and I hope you guys have a great season this year. Just one loss to the guys in Norman. But other than that, other than that, I hope y'all have a great season. Hope we meet up in the Big 12 championship too. I really do. That's my prediction, or not prediction yet, but that's my hopes and dreams. Is that OU in Texas last year in the Big 12? Is they duke it out one last time for the Big 12 championship? That would be pretty awesome to see.
Yeah,
So
it was kind of cool to see that a few years ago, and one of the more interesting things you look at, the early Big 12, especially once Stoops got there to Oklahoma. That Red River Shootout game really determined who was going to go play for the Big Championship from the South. And how cool would
yeah,
it have been if they didn't have those divisions? It would have been Texas and Oklahoma in the Big 12 championship game, like, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 years in a row. Uh,
right.
but that's just not the way it worked out with the division. So uh, I think you look at the new Big 12 that doesn't have divisions. I think there's definitely the possibility for that. And then when they move into the SEC, who knows how I pity the fool that's got to write the tiebreak rules for all the SEC sports going forward with 16 teams.
I know that is gonna be crazy to figure all that out. But man, Sean, I really appreciate you coming on. I had a great time talking with you, and I'm hope you be willing to come back on, especially getting closer to football season.
Yeah,
Would love to have you on again. But man, it was really great talking with you. And like I said, I'm going to put your links in the description on the video, so you'll see that. But yeah, if you guys make sure you guys like and subscribe, and like if you haven't, also go to on YouTube his Horn Takes podcast. I think it's just under Horn on YouTube. It's under Horn Takes. So check his show out. Like I said, the link will be in the description when you watch the video. Like and subscribe to both of our channels, and hope everybody has a good evening. And see you next time.
hook 'em.